Okay, so now we're going to talk about theoretical probability. So, say you're going to toss a coin. So, your chances are that you're going to get either heads or you're going to get tails, right? So you toss a coin. We don't know what we're going to get, right? Like you say, here, let me flip a coin. You don't know if it's heads or tails. So flipping the coin is called an experiment. You don't know the outcome. So you don't know the outcome. That is an experiment then. Okay, so then we talk about, well, what's the probability of getting like heads? Okay, so that's what we're headed toward figuring that out. The sample space, that's the possible outcomes. Possible outcomes. So in our case, well, you're either going to get heads or you're going to get tails. Now, they'll write this oftentimes as a set in set notation. Okay, and sample space is S. So S is you're either getting heads or tails. Okay, two choices. N of S, that's the number of outcomes in your sample space. Okay, so the number of possible, I guess we could say the number of possible outcomes. That might be easier. Okay, so if we want to compute the theoretical probability of an event, okay, so P of E, you're going to take the number of outcomes and divide that by the number of outcomes, of possible outcomes, I guess. Now that probably sounds confusing. I'm going to give you the notation here. So the number of outcomes, that has to do with your event. Okay, so if you want to know the probability of getting heads, then you're saying how many different ways are there to get heads? Well, there's only one way to get heads, right? Okay. And then you're dividing by the number of possible outcomes, so N of S, okay? So the N of E, that's the number of outcomes, of outcomes for the event. You'll see it in the first example. Sometimes it's hard to talk about this before we get into some examples. Okay, so if we wanted to find the probability of getting heads, we'd say, well, there's one outcome, right? Getting heads out of, there are two choices, heads or tails. Okay, so that's what the probability is, 1 over 2, or you could say 0.5 or 50%, Okay. And they might even put another 0 there. Okay. All right. So let's look at a different example that'll help. A die is rolled. Okay, so we're talking about, like people don't say the word die very often, but it's a dice, right? Like you have a 1 here and 2 here, and maybe you play Yahtzee. Okay, something like that. Okay, so find the probability of getting a number less than 5. Okay, so you have 6 choices, right? So the sample space is you could get a 1, you could get a 2, you could get a 3, you could get a 4, you could get a 5, you could get a 6. Those are the choices. So N of S would be 6. Okay, now we're trying to find the probability of getting a number less than 5. The event is, that's getting a number less than 5. Getting less than 5. So what outcomes is that? Well, if you got a 1 or a 2 or a 3 or a 4, that would be getting a number less than 5. Okay, so N of E, so our probability of getting a number less than 5 is going to be N of E divided by N of S. So there are 4 ways. So N of E is 4. And so you're going to have 4 choices. You could get a 1, a 2, a 3, or a 4 divided by, there were a total of 6 choices. Now, they might write that as 2/3 as a fraction. They might write it as 0.667. Yeah, my guess is they're going to write it one of those two ways, right? Like if you divided it out. Okay, so we're going to see some more examples in the next video.